In this video, I want to teach you a system that allows you to remember and actually use almost everything you read, study, or learn. This isn't theory. I've relied on this system for years, starting from learning complex disease mechanisms in medical school, all the way through reading scientific research, mastering new skills, and studying books on productivity in business. What makes this system powerful is not motivation or talent, but structure. It works because it separates learning into two very different stages that most people unknowingly mix up. The first stage is about taking information in. The second stage is about making that information stay. Most learners put nearly all their energy into the first stage. They try to read faster, watch lectures at double or triple speed, binge audiobooks, or consume endless YouTube tutorials, believing that more input automatically leads to more knowledge. But that belief is exactly why so much of what we read disappears. Once you understand how learning actually works at a deeper level, you'll see why this system is so reliable. Retention and application don't depend on how much information enters your brain. They depend on how much survives after you're done reading. Most people assume that learning is a volume problem. If they can just read more pages, watch more videos, or attend more lectures, they believe understanding will eventually follow. That assumption leads to habits like speed reading without reflection, replaying lectures endlessly, or filling notebooks with notes that are never revisited. On the surface, it feels productive. In reality, it's passive consumption. Learning doesn't break down because people are lazy or unintelligent. It breaks down because the brain doesn't work like a storage device where you dump information and retrieve it later unchanged. The human brain is selective, limited, and highly dependent on how information is processed after it's consumed. When we ignore this, we end up with the illusion of progress, hours spent studying with very little to show for it days later. True learning is not about exposure, it's about transformation. Information must be processed, connected, challenged, and encoded before it becomes usable. Without that second step, the brain simply discards most of what it encounters. Once we accept that forgetting is not a failure, but a predictable outcome of poor processing, we can design a system that works with the brain instead of against it. Every act of learning can be divided into two distinct phases. The first is consumption, reading, listening, watching, or observing new information. The second is digestion, the process that turns raw input into long-term memory and usable knowledge. Most people spend nearly all their time in the first phase and almost none in the second. Digestion is where learning actually happens. It's where information is encoded, meaning is extracted, and connections are formed. Without digestion, consumption is temporary. You may understand something while reading it, but understanding without digestion fades quickly. Think of learning like eating. You can consume as much food as you want, but if your body doesn't digest it properly, you gain no nourishment. In fact, overeating without digestion causes harm. Learning works the same way. When consumption outpaces digestion, overwhelm sets in, retention collapses, and frustration grows. The system I'm teaching is designed to balance these two stages deliberately. Every piece of information you consume must be followed by a matching digestion process. Only then does learning become reliable, efficient, and transferable to real-world use. At this point, it's fair to ask whether it's even possible to remember everything you read. The honest answer is no, and that's not a problem. In fact, trying to remember everything is the wrong objective entirely. There was a man named Kim Peek who could recall virtually everything he ever read. His memory was so precise that he could reproduce books word for word after reading them once, including punctuation. He memorized thousands of maps and could calculate the shortest route between any two cities entirely in his head. His abilities were extraordinary, caused by a rare neurological condition that altered how his brain developed. Yet despite this phenomenal memory, he struggled with reasoning and problem-solving. If the task required simple recall, he excelled. But when higher-level thinking was required, analysis, synthesis, judgment, his advantage disappeared. This reveals a crucial truth. Memory alone is not the same as understanding. For most of us, the purpose of learning is not recall for its own sake. It's the ability to think, solve problems, and apply knowledge effectively. The goal is not to remember everything, but to remember what matters in a way that you can use. One of the biggest mistakes learners make is treating information the same. We read everything with the same mindset, use the same note-taking approach, and rely on the same memorization strategies regardless of what the material actually is. This creates confusion, inefficiency, and mental fatigue. In reality, different kinds of information serve different purposes, and each requires a different digestion method. When we use the wrong process for a particular type of information, learning becomes slower, harder, and far less effective. This is also how people slip into passive reading, reaching the end of a page with no memory of what they just read. To solve this, I categorize information into 5 distinct types, each with a targeted way to process it. During the consumption stage, your job is to identify what type of information you're dealing with. During the digestion stage, you apply the correct process for that category. This prevents overload, improves retention, and ensures that the time you spend studying actually builds usable knowledge instead of evaporating days later. Procedural information is anything that explains how to do something. It's step-by-step knowledge, methods, techniques, and actions. Examples include performing a clinical examination, writing code, operating software, or speaking a new language. Many technical fields are dominated by this type of information. The only effective way to digest procedural information is practice. Reading about a skill does not build the skill. Memorizing instructions does not create competence. Application does. The earlier you practice after exposure, the stronger the learning becomes. A common mistake is delaying practice. People read, highlight, take notes, and promise themselves they'll apply it later. By the time they do, much of the information is already gone. That time was wasted. If you don't have time to practice immediately, the correct response is not to keep reading, it's to pause. Consumption without digestion is counterproductive. Learning only happens when both stages are completed. Otherwise, you're just accumulating information your brain will soon discard. Analogous information is new knowledge that relates to something you already understand. It becomes powerful when you actively connect it to prior experience. These connections can come from within the same subject or from different domains. For example, learning about muscle contraction might remind you of swimming technique. Recognizing that similarity creates an analogy, but the real learning happens when you critique the analogy. You ask where it fits, where it breaks, and how accurate it really is. You examine similarities, differences, and limitations. This process forces deeper thinking. Instead of passively accepting new information, you integrate it into existing mental structures. The brain loves connections, and analogies provide a shortcut to meaning. Analogous learning feels effortful at first because it's not natural. That's precisely why it works. It demands attention, evaluation, and judgment. These are the conditions under which information becomes durable. Over time, this approach becomes faster and more intuitive, dramatically improving comprehension and recall. Conceptual information explains what things are and how they relate. It includes principles, theories, relationships, and explanations. Most academic subjects rely heavily on this type of knowledge. Concepts do not exist in isolation. They form networks. Experts don't think in linear sentences. They navigate interconnected systems of ideas. That's what allows them to solve complex problems. Beginners, by contrast, see disconnected facts. The best way to digest conceptual information is through mapping. Non-linear note-taking methods like mind maps force you to represent knowledge as a network rather than a list. As you read, you add concepts, link them, rearrange them, and refine your understanding. Mapping turns passive reading into active construction. It helps you think like an expert by rebuilding the conceptual framework behind the material. If you don't have time to map, you must slow down consumption. Otherwise, you'll forget and relearn the same material repeatedly, wasting enormous amounts of time. Evidence information supports concepts. It includes data, examples, case studies, statistics, and historical details. Its role is to make abstract ideas concrete and defensible. The digestion process for evidence has 2 parts: storing and rehearsing. Storing happens immediately. As soon as you identify evidence, you capture it, whether in a note system, a document, or flashcards. You do not try to memorize it while reading. Rehearsal happens later. This is when you actively use the evidence, solving problems, writing explanations, teaching others, or constructing arguments. Rehearsal strengthens retention because it mirrors how the information will be used. Trying to deeply memorize evidence during reading steals time from more important learning processes. Evidence only makes sense when it attaches to strong conceptual foundations. Build those first. Reference information consists of precise details you may need to recall exactly. These details don't change your understanding, but they may be required for exams, work, or accuracy. Examples include formulas, names, constants, or definitions. This type of information is best handled through storage and spaced rehearsal. Flashcards are ideal, especially when combined with active recall and spaced repetition. The critical mistake is trying to memorize reference information while reading. That approach is inefficient and mentally draining. Capture it quickly, move on, and rehearse it later in a dedicated session. This preserves your cognitive resources for deeper learning.
Reference information is necessary, but it should never dominate your study time. When it does, learning efficiency collapses. At the heart of this system is balance. Consumption and digestion must stay aligned. Every piece of information you take in must be processed in the correct way. When they fall out of balance, learning breaks down. Most forgetting isn't caused by poor memory, it's caused by overconsumption without digestion. When you slow down, choose the right process, and respect the brain's limits, retention improves dramatically. This framework doesn't just help you remember more, it helps you build working knowledge that compounds over time. That's what leads to mastery. Learning efficiently is complex. Many processes must work together to achieve high performance. What we covered here is only a small part of the full picture. It took me years of experimentation, research, and coaching to identify what actually matters. To make that journey easier for you, I share the most effective strategies in a free weekly newsletter. Everything is designed to be practical, concise, and immediately usable. If you want to continue improving how you learn without spending years figuring it out alone, you'll find the link in the description. Thank you for watching.